All right, draft season about over here, folks. I'm John Schmeelk, joined as always by Tony, Pauline, and Eric Crocker. Episode number 16, our final episode of the 2022 draft season with a peek ahead to 2023. This podcast is presented by Tommy Hilfiger, a PVH brand, and an official partner of the New York Football Giants. We're going to look ahead on this show, folks, which means we're going to make some predictions about the 2022 draft class, and we'll do a quick look ahead to what the 2023 class might look like with obviously a year of college football to go. So, guys, let's start here. General trends with this draft coming out of it. We had a few days to kind of absorb it. You guys did a great job reviewing the draft on the podcast that dropped on Sunday in my absence. I appreciate it. Excellent work. So let's discuss trends. And I guess my trend would be we see wide receivers getting paid now. And some of these teams, I think, are prioritizing finding good wide receivers on their cost control contracts, which is why so many of these wide receivers went early in round number one. Croc, do you agree?
Yeah, and that was actually going to be one of my kind of major takeaways is what is the value of the receiver and what is that market? You've seen teams not really want to pay receivers where it was kind of trending in the sense of, north of $21-22 million. And, it's coming out that the Tennessee Titans were like, you know what? No, we don't want to pay you anything more than $16 million to A.J. Brown. So we'd rather trade you, let someone else pay you, and then draft a player with that selection. And there's a lot of unknown with it. So, I think, they're kind of telling us what the market is for the receiver right now. I think they're trying to do a little bit of cost control.
Yeah, I mean, it's a natural progression of things. You got your quarterbacks who the past couple of years have been given these huge contracts, and you got to do two things. You got to protect the quarterback, and you got to give the quarterback weapons to throw to. So in my opinion, this is just a natural progression. The next highest paid group is going to be these receivers. And, as you said, you're either going to sign the veteran receivers or trade for the veteran receivers, as we saw in the lead up to the 2022 draft and on draft day for huge contracts, or you're going to bring them in and, like you said, try and reduce your costs to them. Now, what's going to happen is, if these guys turn into the A.J. Brown or DK Metcalf types 3 or 4 years down the road, they're going to get massive contracts, or they're going to be traded for, a bunch of picks, as we saw on Thursday night.
I think it'll be interesting because there's only so much salary cap space. And I realize the cap is going up, and, the last 2 years a bit of an anomaly because of COVID. So the cap didn't go up. It actually went down 1 year. But with quarterbacks, now making $40 million, the top ones, right? And it's going to head up to even, 50, 60 in the next few years as more guys get extensions. Teams are going to have to figure out who they want to pay. And at some point, right now, if you're paying a quarterback 40, a wide receiver 25, that's literally almost a third of the salary cap right now. And I think it's hard to build a team that way. So the draft, I think, is going to be even more important as the better players' contracts get higher. And we've seen this in the NBA, right? The stars get paid a lot and they even have a max. And then the middle class kind of gets gypped a little bit in the whole deal. So I think what you'll see is that as these great players get paid more and more, the importance of the draft to find good players to fill in those spots where you're not putting a lot of your salary cap towards whatever position, offense, defense, whatever, Tony, is going to become more and more important.
Yeah, what's going to happen is this. When you get one or two players that are eating up such a huge proportion, huge percentage of your salary cap, people talk about the first round ad nauseum. Those day 3 picks, you've got to hit on them because those day 3 picks are going to be the guys that fill out your depth chart at an inexpensive salary. And what's going to happen is, and I know this is a little bit off topic, is those second tier and those third tier veterans are going to lose out because it's going to be much cheaper to say pay a rookie, $400,000, $500,000 a year than to pay the veteran minimum, which is what, $1.6 million a year, I believe it is right now, or maybe you know better than I do. But that's what's going to happen. You got to hit on those late day picks, those late day 3 picks, because those are going to be players that fill out your roster to compensate for the fact that so few players are at the top of your salary cap and chewing up so much of your salary cap.
And that's what we've seen from the LA Rams, right? Where a lot of people are like, well, how do they keep signing all these guys? And they have unlimited cap space. The cap isn't real. But what they're doing is they are paying their big time guys. And there's so few of them, but the rest of their rosters are guys that they're getting contributions from that were drafted in the mid to late rounds. And if you're not going to have early round picks and use those on guys like Jalen Ramsey or Matthew Stafford, then you better be damn good drafting in those day 2, day 3. And that's where they have excelled. And I think other teams, I'm not saying you'll see everyone try to use that philosophy, but I think it might become a little bit more of a trend in the NFL.
Yeah, I'll just say this about the Rams too. And, we haven't talked about them much. They didn't pick until the end of the 3rd round, but, in order to sign Allen Robinson, they did have to trade Robert Woods, right? They had to let Von Miller walk. Their starting left tackle, who they were paying a lot of money, retired. So in order for them to sign some of these other guys, money did come off. Johnson, the safety, they had to let walk as well, who's a really good player, right? So they've had to make some of these tough decisions. And I think we're seeing more and more of these teams, especially with the wide receivers, saying, all right, maybe we want to pay an edge player on defense. We want to pay an offensive tackle. We can't pay the wide receiver too. We're going to trust that our great quarterback can raise the level of the offensive players around them and spend our money elsewhere. Where do you think we're going to start seeing a squeeze, guys, on some of these salaries where teams will forego some of these positions? And how might that impact the draft moving forward? Either one of you can jump in.
I would think cornerback, right? Because cornerback, one, is just such a tough position to play in general. There aren't a lot of guys that are playing at such this high level to where it's like you can really say, oh, yeah, we're going to pay this guy, $15, $16 million a year over someone we can have come in and still get contribution from him. I look at the 49ers situation, obviously a team that I'm very familiar with, and the philosophy that they've taken on. They've been out there, aside from paying Charvarius Ward, which they're not even paying him a ton of money when you actually look at what the contract truly is. But outside of that, they've been getting by with guys like Emmanuel Mosley. They had Kelly Witherspoon while he was on rookie contract. They did sign a Richard Sherman, but even then his contract was very team friendly unless he was a Pro Bowler and all pro and played a certain amount of games. But they've been getting by with very average corners, which most teams probably couldn't even name who the 49ers starting corners were a season ago, but still had the number 6 pass defense in the NFL, still had the number 3 overall defense in the entire league. And they were able to do that because, they get after up front. So if I'm going to make a cut anywhere as far as cost goes, it probably will be some members of the secondary. And I would really specifically point to the corners, which is really hard to be a good corner in the NFL nowadays.
Yeah. And Tony, really quick, before you go, just throw out there, I think this is why teams are playing more and more zone too, right? Zone corners are much cheaper than press man corners, right? You don't have to go, if you're playing a lot of cover 3 and quarters and cover 2, you don't have to pay the corner as much to do that as you do if you're playing a lot of press man. Go ahead, Tony.
Yeah, I still think the top cornerbacks are going to make good money, but I think if you're looking at 2 positions, you got to look at your non-pass rushing linebackers, guys like Bobby Wagner, and you got to look at your running backs. There was there's a couple of reasons why Nakobe Dean really was never didn't get first round consideration. 2-down player, teams don't value that 5th-year option on him. And it's probably another reason why Breece Hall didn't go in the first round. Buffalo could have very well taken Breece Hall with that 5th round, but that 5th round option is more valuable at other positions. So I think running back and linebacker, the non-pass rushing linebackers, are areas where teams are going to try and skimp and save.
All right, guys, any other major trends from the draft you want to address, or we can start moving on to draft superlatives and predictions?
Well, you were talking about, movement with the wide receivers. I think you got to look at the movement with the quarterbacks. As Eric and I, talked about in the last show, look at what's going on the past 2 years. You've had Carson Wentz traded twice. You had Matthew Stafford traded for Jared Goff and a bunch of picks. This year you had Russell Wilson traded. You had Matt Ryan traded. You had, average or quarterbacks like Mitch Trubisky and Marcus Mariota that have never lived up to expectations, get decent free agent contracts. And then, you had a bunch of quarterbacks that people thought could be first-round picks fall into the 3rd round. So I think it may be a situation, and we won't know, for the next couple of years, where teams may be, we're either going to go out and get a trade for our quarterback, or we're going to get a middle-tier quarterback that we know that has some NFL experience, and we're going to sign him rather than draft a quarterback very early, a quarterback that we know nothing about as far as NFL potential is concerned or NFL playing time is concerned, and try and develop them. That'll be interesting to see if that takes shape moving forward.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, Tony, because I think the glut and the large amount of, at some point a couple of years ago, we got to cut to the point there were more good quarterbacks than were starting spots. But since then, we've had Drew Brees retire, right? We've had Eli Manning retire. We've had other older quarterbacks retire. And I think now more and more openings are happening. And obviously, Tom Brady's going to retire soon. Matt Ryan's going to get to that point pretty soon. You have a couple of other spots open up here. Phillip Rivers retired. Ben Roethlisberger retired. That kind of 2003 and after group is kind of slowly getting out of the game. We're going to have more of these spots open up, and teams are going to have to make some difficult choices. Croc, you got anything else in the draft? You want to start?
Let me just go back to that. The Drew Brees retired, and what has New Orleans done to address the quarterback position?
Yeah, they've gone cheap. Veterans, yeah. 100%. All right, let's go, guys. Let's go here first. Favorite draft class. Croc, why don't we start with you? Who do you like?
Oh, I have a couple. All right. And I'm definitely starting off with the Houston Texans because I look at this team, a team that had a lot of holes, and I'd say their first 5 draft picks are guys that not only should likely start and have an impact on their team, but I think they would probably have an opportunity to start on most teams. Derek Stingley Jr., you draft a corner like that, I think most teams are plugging him in to their starting lineup. Kenyon Green coming in to play offensive guard. I think he's a guy, he's going to step in and play right away. Jalen Petrie as a safety. Will he be a safety or will he be kind of that hybrid star nickel type guy? But again, I feel like a player of his caliber and the prospect he is, most teams will probably look to him to be a starter. And then you have John Mechie. I think he's a guy that could be a legit wide receiver 3 right away. And a lot of teams are going to a lot of 11 personnel. And then Christian Harris and Damian Pierce. And that was a team that really needed that running back. They have Rex Burkhead. And then outside that, it's like, okay, who's going to really be able to tote the rock and threaten teams? And they draft a guy like Damian Pierce. So you just look at those picks right there. I'm like, man, this is a team that I feel like got better right away.
How about you, Tone?
I know you're not gonna like this too much. A lot of the listeners are not gonna like it, but you got to love what the Philadelphia Eagles did. I mean, they take Jordan Davis, they move up to get Jordan Davis to steal him away from the Baltimore Ravens, and Davis is just going to fortify that interior defensive line. People say he's not a pass rusher. I disagree, but even if he's not a pass rusher, his ability to gobble up blockers, to occupy the gaps, will create opportunities for those edge rushers, will create opportunities for zone blitzes, for corner blitzes. So that I thought was a tremendous pick. I've always thought that Jordan Davis was underrated and was going to be underdrafted. I think that's what happened. You got to factor in the trade for A.J. Brown. That immediately improves their receiving corps. It immediately gives Jalen Hurts another top target to throw the ball to, and they signed him to a 4-year extension for $100 million. I thought Cam Jurgens at the bottom third of round 2 was an exceptional pick. People say, well, he's a center, not need a center. He can play center. He can play guard. He fits that system. He's a big, tough, punching mouth guy. I wrote about it a couple of days before the draft, how he was moving up draft boards. I think that was an exceptional pick. Nakobe Dean was outstanding value in the 3rd round. There's some concerns about some injuries there. He never worked out before the draft, which is not a good thing when you're 5'11", 226 pounds. There's a concern he's maybe just a 2-down defender. I could agree with that. I think that's a justifiable concern, but he's still an explosive football player. He's a terrific run defender that goes sideline to sideline. And then in round 6, they get Grant Calcaterra from SMU, the outstanding pass-catching tight end, who had a great career at Oklahoma, actually retired because of concussion issues, came back, had another real good season last year at SMU. You roll the dice on him in round 6. He fits the Eagles system. He is an outstanding pass catcher. He's a real good athlete. I know a lot of it comes down to Jalen Hurts, and I'm not a big Jalen Hurts guy. But when you look at a draft that can take a team and really elevate them to the next level, I think that's what the Eagles did.
Yeah, and by the way, I'll point out too that the reason they're able to pay an A.J. Brown is because Jalen Hurts isn't making a ton of money, right? So you don't have money on the quarterback. You can pay a wide receiver. All right, I'm going to go Baltimore Ravens, who just seem to sit in their spot every year and good players drop to them. Kyle Hamilton at 14. We've talked about him a lot on the show. I think that's about the right neighborhood for him. Not a top 5 guy, but I think middle of the 1st round. They'll figure out a way to use him in their defense where his size and physicality, I think, pay off. Linderbaum, I know Tony's not the biggest fan of him either, but I think at 25, I'm curious to see how they use him in that scheme.
Yeah.
Is there not a zone running scheme? So I'm going to curious to see how that works. But with that running game, I think it's going to work. He's a wrestler. Ojabo, would it shock me if we were talking in 4 or 5 years that David Ojabo is the best sack artist in this draft class? Nope. Wouldn't surprise me. And they get him in the 2nd round. Would it shock me in 4 years if Travis Jones is a excellent Pro Bowl caliber defensive tackle? Nope. Got him in the 3rd round. Then the Ravens, they just pick big people, right? Well, who's bigger than Daniel Falele? They get him in the round 4, which I think was a great value. I thought he was a 3rd round pick. Some people like Jalen Armour-Davis a lot. I'm curious if they use Falele. He's kind of like a lesser version of Orlando Brown, just a huge guy you have to run around, right? That didn't test really well. They draft 2 tight ends. Lamar Jackson loves throwing the tight ends. Charlie Kohler, Isaiah Likely, 2 different guys, but they can catch the football. Tyler Beatty, I think, is a good 6th round running back. He can do a little bit in the passing game. So I think overall, I think the Ravens did well. I think they got a lot of good players. Interesting that they trade Marquise Brown and Hollywood Brown, then do not add a wide receiver. I think that's interesting. So we'll see what happens with that position-wise for them. But I thought the Ravens really had an excellent draft.
Interesting with the Ravens is they get one of the biggest offensive linemen, or the biggest offensive lineman in Philly, and they take one of the smallest offensive linemen in Linderbaum. I agree, Linderbaum. Unless they think he's a good center for Lamar Jackson, the way Lamar Jackson plays, it's an interesting pick because it doesn't fit the system at all. I love the tight ends that they drafted, but now they got 4 tight ends on it. You usually keep 3 tight ends. So what's going to happen? Are they going to cut one of the veterans? Are they going to try and trade one of the veterans? And Travis Jones, after losing out on Jordan Davis, was an exceptional consolation prize, if you will.
Yeah, I'm
sure talking about Baltimore.
When you were live on Friday, Croc, he's been like, "Where's my guy Travis Jones? He's got to be going soon, right?"
Oh yeah, I know he slid down pretty far, but that was a joyful moment. One of our people hosting covered him at UConn and had a lot of good things to say about him. But I want to talk about real quick with Baltimore. Just you talked about them not adding a receiver, and you look at the receivers they have right now. You got Rashad Bateman, you got Duvernay and Prochet. Those guys are gonna have to really take big steps. And I think Bateman showed like, okay, I have the ability. There were some games where he started to come into his own, especially after he got healthy. But you got Tylan Wallace. They're going to need a lot out of him as well. This isn't this young star-studded group. And I know the Ravens fans really desperately wanted to add a receiver with Hollywood Brown. Now you lose Hollywood Brown and you still don't add a receiver. I think that was very questionable.
Yeah, I think a lot of 12 and 13 personnel coming for the Ravens when they line up this year, no question. All right, similar question, but a little bit different. Which team do you think's draft class will impact them the most as they try to take a step as a team? So which team, I guess, improved the most with their draft class would be one way to phrase it, but you think really will get a lot of impact out of this draft class for how they're trying to kind of grow their team? Tony, let's go to you first.
You got to go with the New York Jets. I mean, you look at the Jets, it could be a transformational draft. Now, granted, it's all on paper, and the history of the Jets is they win in April, but when the season starts in September, it doesn't turn out as planned. But look, they got the top cornerback in the draft in Ahmad Gardner. They got the top receiver in the draft in Garrett Wilson. They come back at the top of round 2. They make a trade. They get the top running back in the draft in Breece Hall. Oh, by the way, they get the pass rusher that they had considered with one of those 2 picks, the 4th or 10th pick, in Jermaine Johnson. When Johnson falls down into the late part of round 1, they trade up and they get him. They get Jeremy Ruckert in the 3rd round, a terrific developmental receiver that's not going to have to play right away. They get a situational pass rusher, Michael Clemens. I mean, this is Joe Douglas working with Robert Saleh to basically fill needs with the top players in the draft that can have a lot of impact. Now, like I said, it's only on paper. And the history has not always been that they are able to transition that great looking draft on paper into football production. And, like with the Philadelphia Eagles, so much of it will rely, so much of it will rely on the hopeful improvement of one Zach Wilson, because if these guys play great, but Zach Wilson turns out to have another dud season, you're not going to be able to win games by a score of 3-2 or 7-6. But I think on paper right now, where we sit, this has the potential to really transform the New York Jets and catapult them moving forward.
Yeah, I'm going to pick a team on the other side of the spectrum here. I'm going to go Kansas City Chiefs. They're an excellent team already, but I really think their draft is going to help them improve right away. They need a defensive end on defense. They get George Karlaftis, who'll step in. They'll use him well. He's a solid player. They need a quarterback. You get Trent McDuffie with the 21st pick in the 1st round. He'll step in. He'll be good right away. You need a wide receiver. Somehow Sky Moore gets to pick 22 in round 2. He's going to be great for them this year. They lose Tyrann Mathieu. They bring in Brian Cook, safety out of Cincinnati, who's a very good player. Then they get the linebacker Leo Chenal in round 3. Darian Kennard, who is similar to the Tyler Smith pick last year. He drops because of medicals, right? If he can stay healthy, he can help the offensive line right away and be a guy that moves around. So I think the Chiefs, and you usually don't think of, teams that are picking late in the draft and, were play away from going to the Super Bowl and things of that nature of really helping themselves in the draft. I think the Chiefs went a long way to addressing some of their needs, but they didn't have to reach to address those needs. In fact, you could argue with 30, they got great value with Karlaftis. They got great value with Moore in round 2. Leo Chenal in round 3 is good value. Kennard is good value in round 5. So I thought the Chiefs did a lot to help their roster here and fill some holes, especially on defense, headed into this season. Croc, how about you?
I could have went with Houston on this because I do think they got guys that will make immediate impacts, but I'm going to go with the 49ers arch enemies, Seattle Seahawks, and what they did. And I feel like if you just look at the names that they got, it's like who was mentioned the most on social media names, name group started off with Charles Cross. And that was good because now you have a day one guy that's going to step in and play that left tackle position. Then you got Boye Mafe. They desperately need to get an edge rusher. I mean, they've been using Jamal Adams in that role, right? I mean, the team, a couple of years ago, he led the team in sacks. You want to be able to get that type of production, but from the guy that is actually a pass rusher. Then they went and got Kenneth Walker. They have had Chris Carson. I know they drafted Penny, but, if you want to try to replace those guys and get more out of it, Carson's kind of been banged up here and there. Get a guy like Kenneth Walker who could do it all, could potentially be that every down back. Continue on. Abraham Lucas. This is an offensive line that really needed to improve and get a lot better throughout the entire offensive line. I think Lucas can help with that. And then you see what they did in the 4th and 5th rounds with cornerback Kobe Bryant, cornerback Tariq Woolen. Woolen is probably more of a kind of a development pick, but has really high upside. And if they're not putting him in situations or if they put him in positions where he can play more like Brandon Brown or Richard Sherman, and he gets that kind of knowledge of the game from reading down concepts, he can be terrific, a great athlete there. And Kobe Bryant, he brings a level of consistency, a guy that won the Jim Thorpe Award. And then you look at Tyreek Smith, and, people aren't really talking about him as a pass rusher, but a guy who showed up at the Senior Bowl, and he had some questionable reps against Penning, but he also had some really good reps. And a guy that's really just going to come off the edge, try to win with speed, but he has ability there. Then, Bo Milton, another guy who can add a little bit more dynamicness to this, a guy that can potentially win vertical. And we'll see what happens at the quarterback position. I know they got Drew Lock there, but just in the team where I felt like they addressed a lot of needs and got guys that could potentially come in and play with, good kind of experience there. I like a lot of what Seattle did.
All right, let's stay on the positive side of things. Which pick do you think, guys, was the biggest steal where they got the best value given where the player was selected? Tony, why don't we start with you?
Oh, there's a lot of them. I mean, obviously, you got to go with Malik Willis. I would say Jermaine Johnson as well in the early part. I got to go with one of those two guys. I'll have to look at the day 3 picks because there's always a winner there. But I got to say Jermaine Johnson if I've got to go with the 2 because he's more NFL ready than Malik Willis. He's going to have the ability to impact the team the earliest, and he also fits the need. I mean, the Jets have been looking for a pass rush since John Abraham left in 2007, 2008. And Jermaine Johnson, for them anyway, hopefully will fill that need.
How about you, Croc? Favorite Steelers draft, best value?
Yeah, I'm going to go with Nakobe Dean. I'm going to go with Nakobe Dean. Just because I get the injury thing. And if you get a guy who flashed a lot of ability, and I know, like Tony said, that he's a guy that can definitely improve in the coverage aspect of things, but just coming in, how he flies around and the ability that he has, I do think that the coverage is something that he can improve on, being able to get him where they got him. This is a blue chip type prospect who slipped because of an injury, and we'll find out the severity of that. If he has to get surgery, how long he'll be out. But if he's not missing time, I think that's a guy where, man, you got a big time player really late in this draft.
All right, I'll give you a couple day 3 guys here that I like. You ever wonder if NFL teams care about testing? Oh, the combine doesn't matter. Testing is not a big deal. Look where Jamari Salyer got picked. It was the only guy all year that could block Aiden Hutchinson. All year. Only guy that blocked him. goes to the 6th round with pick number 16 because his testing was awful. And Tony, unless I'm wrong, I don't think there's anything medical with him that was an issue, right?
No, I also think it's, where you're going to play him at the next level. I have him as a guard. I agree with you, though.
But look, he ended up getting picked by the Chargers. I could see that guy starting a guard for them by the end of the year. And look, they picked Zion Johnson earlier in the draft, so maybe not. They don't have room for him. But I thought that was really good value in round 6 for Salyer. He's a good player, even if he's not your ideal athlete. I'll throw one other out there. The Packers, round 5, Kingsley and Igbare. Some people had him in round 2. I didn't have him quite that high, but I thought round 5 for a guy like that had one of the best pass rush win rates in college football last year, was really good. And then I'll throw Calvin Austin in round 4. I know he's a smaller guy, but boy, he's fast and he can run routes. For the Steelers, they got the guy in the 4th round when, frankly, receivers went above him that didn't, for me, were a round or 2 below him where I had him on my rankings. I thought that was really good value getting Calvin Austin in round 4.
Yeah, I think my 49ers. Yeah, they drafted Danny Gray to be that kind of speed guy and pull coverage and do those things. I'm like, how do you do that with Calvin? You could have used Calvin Austin as that, and I feel like he's much more dynamic from a jitterbug standpoint, run after catch, special teams aspects. So I thought the 49ers missed an opportunity there to be able to get a guy that, I think, he shouldn't. I thought he would go at some point early 3rd round. For him to go even later than that, good job by the Pittsburgh Steelers.
Yeah, I think at 5'7.5", he's an acquired taste. It's going to be a situation where you got to be willing to design plays for him. You got to have a position for him. Because of that lack of height, I thought all along he was a perfect fit for the Kansas City Chiefs to replace Tyreek Hill. Obviously, as you mentioned earlier, no one expected Sky Moore to be there late in round 2, and when he was, the Chiefs jumped all over him.
All right, let's say I'm gonna skip over for now. We'll see if time at the end for the least favorite and the biggest reaches in the class. Let's go to predicting offensive rookie of the year. I'm gonna go first here because Tony just mentioned the guy. I think it's Sky Moore. I think he's catching 80 balls for 1,200 yards for the Chiefs this year. The Chiefs signed a bunch of guys, but they don't have that. Juju Smith-Schuster's a good player, doesn't have the speed or jitter. He's not jittery enough. Scantling's more of a speed guy. Sky Moore is a technician, and he can run after catch. Andy Reid's going to use him in a bunch of different ways. I think offensive rookie of the year, Sky Moore. What do you think, Croc?
Oh, man, I'm going with Treylon Burks. This is a guy that has a very similar skill set as A.J. Brown, and I don't want to say he's going to be A.J. Brown, but, if it's plug and play, and it's like, all right, he's not the best separator. He's not the best route runner, but, you know what? He's a lot like A.J. Brown in the sense of run after catch. He could utilize that speed. I know he didn't run as fast. He ran a 4.55, but when the ball's in his hands, he's hitting the high miles per hour. I think they'll know how to utilize him. I think off of the play action fakes to Derrick Henry, be able to get him the ball in space and be able to work off of a guy opposite him and Robert Woods, excuse me. I like the upside of that pick. I think that's a guy that could come in and make an immediate contribution, especially with the quarterback that's there, who isn't the big dynamic passer, but definitely can, he'll take his shots, he'll hit those, and he definitely can throw those crossing routes.
I'm going to go with Christian Watson, who the Green Bay Packers traded up at the top of round 2 to get. I know Christian Watson's going to need a little bit of work before he's truly NFL ready. Very rough around the edges. But Aaron Rodgers has a way to draw the best out of receivers. He has a way of helping receivers elevate their games. And I think that's exactly what he's going to do. I never bought into the Christian Watson first round hype. Granted, he was the 34th pick of the draft, so he wasn't that far away. We saw him catch the ball at the Senior Bowl. We saw him work out at the Combine. I just think that with Aaron Rodgers there, it's going to be much easier for him to take his game to the next level.
I know people are sitting there, wait, you guys just picked 3 wide receivers, and there were 5 wide receivers picked before the guys you just selected. Well, guys, it's all about situation.
Yeah.
I picked the guy with Mahomes throwing to him. Tony picked the guy with Aaron Rodgers throwing to him. And Croc picked the guy with Tannehill throwing it to him. 3 veteran quarterbacks. So that always has a big factor on who's going to be great early. Tony, defensive rookie of the year. Who you got?
I'm going to go with Ahmad Gardner. And the reason is because, excuse me, I'm going to put my trust in Robert Saleh. He's the type of, cornerback that he's had success with in the past. The Jets don't have a number 1 cornerback, and I think Gardner as a rookie is going to get tested a lot by opponents, and he's shown a lot of progress in the game. He's big, he's physical, He's getting to the point where his fundamentals are outstanding. His ball skills are improving. I just look at that system and I look at the coach, and I think that Robert Sala's got an axe to grind. Has got something to prove after what was a bad year for the Jets defense. And Gardner, as far as I'm concerned, is the top corner in this draft. I like Derek Stingley, but I think it's going to be Ahmad Gardner.
Croc, how about you?
You know, I got and this is defensive rookie of the year, right?
Yep.
Yeah, I'm gonna go Jordan Davis. You know, I think, you know, just what he can be next to Fletcher Cox and being able to learn from him. And I'm actually going to double down here. So not only is he going to be my rookie of the year, he's going to be my best player in 4 years in this entire class, just because I think he has a high upside. We see the athleticism that he has. I don't think he's finished as a pass rusher, even though, you know, it's not bad now. I think he's at a good starting point, but can only improve, especially playing against Fletcher Cox. I think having that veteran next to him where you don't have to do everything right away and you can play off of that type of guy, I think he should have not only a tremendous rookie year, but I think he's set up for success moving forward.
I'm going to go Kayvon Thibodeau here. I just think in a Wink Martindale scheme, they're going to blitz a ton, that he's going to get enough free rushes for one. My guess is that they'll move around a little bit and he'll get some advantages based off the scheme. And I think in his first year, he kind of feels like he has something to prove, that he should have got picked a little bit higher. So I was going back and forth between him and Hutchinson. I thought Hutchinson was a little bit chalky, so I decided to go with the hometown guy here with Kayvon Thibodeau. And then the other question, Croc, you mentioned the best player in 4 years. You mentioned you have Jordan Davis. I'm going to go Jamison Williams. You know, I thought that was smart for the Lions to trade up for him. You know, you want to get a dynamic wide receiver. He's the only guy in this group to me that looks and moves differently. Now, we might not be able to tell based on what the Lions quarterback situation is in 3 or 4 years, because we just don't know who the starter is going to be. But I'm going to go with Jamison Williams. I think he's got something special to him. He'll get healthy, I think, in 3-4 years. I think he's going to be the best player in this draft. How about you, Tony?
You know, the Vegas was held in the draft was held in Vegas. So I'm going to roll the dice and I'm going to say Derek Stingley Jr., because I'm going to trust what I saw in 2019 when the film was absolutely amazing. And I'm going to roll the dice and say with Lovie Smith and the fact that, you know, he's heard all these criticisms the past couple seasons, that Derek Stingley gets his game back to where it was in 2019, where if he had entered the draft and he was eligible for the draft, he could potentially been the first pick of the draft, or he would have been the second pick of the draft. Granted, he was the third pick of the draft this year, which tells you what the team thought of him in 2019. So, you know, we've seen a lot of cornerbacks who've had, say, Darrelle Revis, guys like that. I'm going to say it's going to be Derek Stingley, with the hopes that he gets his game back to where he was as a true freshman at LSU and builds upon that.
All right, I'm leaning on you guys for the last 13 minutes of the show that we have before we all got to go. Let's talk and look ahead here, the 2023 NFL draft. Let's start with the quarterbacks, guys. I think everyone knows about C.J. Stroud out of Ohio State, Bryce Young out of Alabama. What are the other quarterbacks that have a chance to kind of rise up that we might be talking about as potential top 10 picks when we roll around to the 2023 draft? Why don't you go first, Croc?
Yeah, ing Will Levis. And again, this is my with this class, everybody's banking on this class, kind of carrying that quarterback thing where, you know, it's like, oh, 2021 or 22, excuse me, not a great quarterback class. Wait till the following year, 2023. You have all these guys. And I'm not sure. We'll see how these guys pan out. But I think Bryce Young, CJ Stroud, a lot of people are really high on them, and we'll see if they can have great follow-up seasons. After that, I do think there's a bit of a drop-off, and we'll see who kind of rises to the occasion. But I think Will Levis out of Kentucky, that's the first guy that kind of comes to mind for me. And again, he has to put it all together and have a tremendous year this season. A little funny, he's the guy that was eating the bananas with the peeling. I thought that was kind of interesting. I don't recommend that. But yeah, Will Levis.
Wow.
Did you see that? Did you see the video?
Peel?
Oh, he ate the banana with the peeling on it and was just chewing it. And I just thought it was
all right. He just dropped 10 spots on my board. Tony, what do you got?
I'm sure it's good for his digestion. It saves room in the trash. But you know, there's a couple of guys. We can't forget about Spencer Rattler because, you know, if things played out as everyone expected, guess what? Spencer Rattler would have been the first quarterback selected this year, probably with the first 3 or 4 picks. had a terrible year. It just could never get it going for an Oklahoma offense. It just never seemed to be able to get it going. I'm not going to forget about Spencer Rattler, who's now playing at South Carolina. Grayson McCall of Coastal Carolina is a guy to consider. A lot of people like Phil Jerkovich of Boston College. To me, he's a big arm passer. He's Desmond Ritter-like in the sense that he's got excellent size. He's got excellent stature. He's got a big arm, but the ball passes go all over the place. And I like the Clemson kid, although he didn't have a good 2021 season. I like when he played the 2 games that he filled in for Trevor Lawrence in 2020. DJ Ugalele, if I pronounced that right, I deserve an award. But I think he's a guy to keep an eye on. I think he's got some upside, and I would agree with Levis. It's going to be interesting. You say everybody knows C.J. Stroud, Bryce Young. Bryce Young was the better and the more consistent quarterback throughout the entire season. Yet everybody's got C.J. Stroud as the number 1 pick based off of that Rose Bowl performance. If you watched Ohio State in the early part of the 2021 season, C.J. Stroud struggled. They lost that game to Oregon. They had a close game against Tulsa. He had a great Rose Bowl. And as Eric and I were talking about the last show, who was the last quarterback that everyone fawned over after a tremendous Rose Bowl performance that everyone anointed as the first pick of the draft? Do you remember that, John?
Sam Darnold.
Sam Darnold, right. And it's not worked out well for him. So, again, I just don't understand why people Stroud's got better size. He's got better stature. But Young has proven himself to be the much more consistent quarterback to date.
And 2 other guys I've seen mentioned: Anthony Richardson out of Florida, Tyler Van Dyke out of Miami. 2 other guys, too, that I've seen. I think McShay might have had both those guys in his round 1 way too early mock for next year, too. Croc, wide receivers. The Ohio State guy obviously had his coming out party already. We know
Smith
about him. Who else at wide receiver? You could talk about him as well. Really jumps out to you.
Oh, man. I mean, there are quite a few that I can think of off the top of my head. You got Jordan Addison. He won the Biletnikoff Award out of Pittsburgh. Now, I'm curious to see if he stays there. I don't know if they're just rumors or what, but he's in the transfer portal or he's not in the transfer portal, and he's going to USC and he's getting paid $3 million. So we'll see where he ultimately ends up. If it's USC, I think I like it even more than him being out of Pittsburgh and potentially being a top 10 pick. But he's a dynamic receiver, one of the more shiftier guys that has explosive ability, a lot of receptions there. Smith and Jigma, you got Keyshawn Boutte, the receiver out of LSU. So I think, and obviously, as this process goes on, there'll be a lot more receivers that end up popping up.
Yeah, Julian Fleming out of Ohio State is a name to keep an eye on. A.T. Perry of Wake Forest is a taller receiver who catches the ball well, who has one of the more underrated quarterbacks throwing to him, and Sam Hartman, a guy who I think is a legitimate next-level prospect, even though he's a little bit smaller. But we'll see, because at this point in time, a year ago, we didn't think too much of the wide receiver class, and then boom, 5 of them go in the top half of round 1. So it could turn out to be a situation like that. Dante Demas of Maryland, a guy who probably was a potential 3rd-round pick this year, had a devastating injury. He's back. Zay Flowers out of Boston College, another good receiver.
College, dynamic, yeah.
By the way, I want to ask you guys, I don't see an Alabama receiver on this list. What's going on? Aren't they? This was to have a top 15 guy every year.
Well, they actually might with the transfer with Jermaine Burton out of Georgia. So, that's someone right there who right away, I like him at Georgia, but the usage just wasn't there. So I think he's not going to be a popular name. I mean, he was getting 28 catches or something like that and still being one of the top receivers on that team. You take him out of there and plug him into Alabama with more of a prolific passing game, I think you could see him take off and potentially be a 1st-round pick. And that tight end that Georgia has, was he a true freshman last year out of California?
Yeah, I think he was a true freshman. Yeah. Bowers, is that who he is?
Bowers, yeah. Went to Folsom. I coached against him. But that's a terrific tight end there, a pass catcher. But if he has to wait another year, he was an older prospect, though. So I don't know if maybe we'll see if he sat out a year or something. There's something weird going on with him. We'll see. But terrific prospect. Maybe he's not coming out yet.
Getting back to Alabama, you're not going to know about these guys when they constantly have underclassmen entering the draft. And I mean, you know what? No one knew about Jameson Williams coming into the season. Not too many people knew all that much about Henry Ruggs the prior year. So, it's basically wait in line. We got to know about John Mechie with the injury the prior year. So, and they've been a receiving making factory for the NFL. So somebody from Alabama will eventually step up.
All right, let's go a couple more positions here, guys. Tony, I'll let you hit the offensive line, offensive tackle. I know there's a couple of Ohio State guys that people like, right? Northwestern kid. Who are some of the offensive tackles, and how does this class look in the early portions compared to the last couple of years?
Yeah, the Ohio State guys are guards that project, Paris Johnson guards who project to offensive tackle. Now that Nicholas Petit-Frere's there, they also have that mammoth kid, I think his name is Juwan Jones on the right side. He's a big, massive, big mountain of a man. Nick Broker of Mississippi, their left tackle, who for the longest time I had heard that he was going to enter the draft, decided to stay back. He's a solid pass blocking left tackle, and that Lane Kiffin offense may project to guard at the next level. A lot of people like Zion Nelson of Miami. I'm not as high on Zion Nelson. He seemed to play his best football 2 years ago. I think he made the best decision going back. It's DeJuan Jones of Ohio State, not 2-1. Jalen Duncan of Maryland is another kid that I really, really like a lot. When you look at the offensive line, the interior offensive line, TJ Bass of Oregon, Javion Cohen of Alabama. You talked about the Northwestern kid. Where is
That'll be Peter Skoronsky, right?
Skoronsky, right? A tackle who projects to guard. As far as the centers are concerned, Jarrett Patterson of Notre Dame, who seems to have been the Notre Dame starting center for the last 40 years, and he's consistently bypassed the draft. While he's going to, I would assume he's going to enter the draft. Arkansas's got a kid by the name of Ricky Stromberg, and Oregon's got one of my favorite centers in Alex Forsythe. So there looks to be some decent amount of talent there.
Croc, you can either do up front on the defense or take the cornerbacks. Where do you want to go?
I'll touch on the up front. And actually, I don't even think we have to talk about this. Will Anderson, probably number 1 overall pick. Yeah. Would have been the number 1 overall pick in this class out of Alabama. But with the cornerbacks, you do have Joey Porter Jr. Yeah. All right. I watched a lot of him at Penn State, especially while watching a lot of film on 49ers 6th-round draft pick, Castro Fields. And Joey Porter Jr., he has the size, he has the length, he has speed. And we'll see if that continues to all kind of come together. And then Elias Ricks was at LSU, transferred to Alabama. This was a top prospect in the nation out of Mater Dei, out in California. Guy that, again, height, weight, speed type guy. And his nickname is Pick Six Ricks. There was one playoff game while he was in high school. He had 3 pick sixes in one game. That didn't stop there. That carried over to LSU. I believe he had 3 pick sixes as a true freshman. So this is a guy that has a lot of upside and ability. And him going to Alabama, I think is only going to make him that much more of a polarizer prospect, potentially a top 10 pick.
Tony, defensive line, he mentioned Will Anderson, Jalen Carter, another probably a top 5 pick right out of Georgia. Is this going to be another strong upfront draft? Any other defensive linemen in about a minute or so here that jump out to you?
Yeah, I mean, Jalen Carter of Georgia. Georgia's just loaded with players. I mean, they lost a lot, but it's basically like Alabama with the receivers. Brian Brees of Clemson. Clemson's got another kid on the offensive line by the name of Miles Murphy. Ali Gay of LSU, who was terrific in 2020, started off slowly in 2021, had an injury, sat out the rest of the season, so he's going back. One of my favorites, and I know I'm going to butcher his name, Zion Tupelo Fatui of Washington, an outstanding explosive pass rusher. I believe he hurt his Achilles the beginning of last year. Hurt his Achilles in spring football of 2021. Tried to make it back last year, played a couple games, was not 100%. Watch him. And then Colby Wooden from Auburn, another terrific pass rusher, decent size. He made a last-minute decision to bypass this year's draft, which I think was a good one. Projected him as a 2nd-round pick. Another good year could vault Wooden of Auburn into the 1st round.
Guys, this was fun. In honor of this, I already got my notebook ready for next year. 2023 NFL Draft. I'm going to make some notes, and then I'm going to go on paternity leave. I'll see you guys in about 2 months. But seriously, guys, great job. Awesome information. This was a lot of fun. I'm glad we did it. And we'll see when we're back next year. We'll be back at some point. And when we do, it'll be fun. Any closing thoughts before we say goodbye, guys, besides fantastic work?
Shout out to all the listeners and people that watch on social media, people that engage with us on social media. I now have a following of New York Giants fans. So, I appreciate that, and all the feedback and positive feedback or negative, whatever, but all the feedback that we've gotten from the fan base. I think that's been awesome.
Yeah, I think the thing that people need to remember is, the draft is not the end. The draft is just the beginning game. People get crazy. Let me talk about here who had the best draft. And as Bill Parcells, the famous New York Giant coach, said, it takes 3 years to figure out whether a draft is a good one. It takes 3 years to figure out whether a guy is truly an NFL player. Robert Saleh also said that in his pre-draft, in his post-draft press conference when people were heaping praise on him. He's like, listen, we won't know for 3 years. Granted, people now want to know in 3 weeks what the situation is, but just take your foot off the pedal and watch these guys. There's going to be bumps in the road, and we'll find out in a couple of years who was right and who was wrong and who did the best job and who didn't do as good a job in the 2022 NFL draft.
Yeah. And that's why we didn't do grades here, folks, because grades are a waste of time. For Tony, for Eric, I'm Schmeelk. Thanks for hanging with us all during draft season, everybody. It was a hell of a ride. It was a lot of fun, and we'll be back next year. We'll see you next time.